Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to day 2 of the Sustainability Summit 2022. We had awesome engagements yesterday, and if you weren't tuned in, we still got you covered because the link is available on YouTube. Once again, please don't forget to hashtag SUSWeek 2022 and to also feel free to visit our 3D online exhibition, as you do stand a lot of prizes to win. Just to recap on some of the conversations and the panel discussions that we had yesterday, we kickstarted the day with the energy seminar. Once again, before that, we had Mr. Janess from SAP, who just gave us a contextual understanding of what is the energy crisis currently, and how can we ensure that policies and current practices can ensure accessibility and efficacy for some of the platforms that we have in the country and also globally. Also, we looked at how do we develop alternative supplies of renewable energy to ensure efficient and effective access, precisely looking at nuclear energy, hydrogen energy as well. And of course, we discussed load shedding, our current crisis. We're not too sure what stage you're on today, but we've got you covered. Don't worry about that. And how do we build a technical capacity around that? We had Mr. Lipschitz there, who told us that load shedding has costed us 10 billion rand per day. This is how crucial and how detrimental the lack of energy supply is causing a lot of systems and businesses in the country. How do we resolve those issues? And we had a couple of our panelists there, Mr. Nichols and also Mr. Pratt, talking about creating more solar systems, having solar access, PV plus storage as well. Also, we looked at how do we decarbonize the economy. It's not just about creating a nuclear or green hydrogen supply when it comes to energy, but how do we build more coal power stations? Because electricity costs 3 times more. And one of the other things for me that stood out is how do we then look at the market, observe the market, create a suitable model for the market, and once again, ensuring that scalability takes place. We then had a panel discussion on gender equality, that supporting women is not just about effective policy and practice and ensuring equality in the workspace, but it's also creating a feasible environment for them to thrive, for them to feel safe in their contribution and in their creativity in the workspace. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, today it's day 2 and we have a packed program once again. We look forward for you to engage on, or rather with us on our online platforms. We are receiving your questions. We are welcoming your insights, and we will ensure that all the speakers have access to that. Just a recap on today, or the day that is about to follow. We're speaking about infrastructure for smart cities. What is infrastructure? We need to provide context to infrastructural development to ensure, is it bankable? Is it sustainable? And can it be functional for the developmental agenda that we have? And also, we're going to be speaking about food security, the value chains around agriculture, around the agribusiness, as well as the ocean economy. And later on, we probably will be speaking about sustainability and ensuring that stakeholders such as young people, stakeholders such as different institutions, community projects are at the core of these conversations. Right after this, we'll be kickstarting the day with infrastructure development. Stay tuned.
The evidence is clear. Organizations with more women in senior positions outperform those with less inclusive C-suites. Yet women remain underrepresented in all levels of management. To bridge this gap, the UN Global Compact launched Target Gender Equality, an accelerator program that helps our participating companies set and meet ambitious corporate targets for women's representation and leadership in business. Companies that commit to the accelerator program are not only equipped with the latest data and research, but they also then join a growing network of partners who are working collectively to tackle the barriers to closing the gender gap from C-suite through to the supply chain and into the communities that these companies serve. Now let's hear from some of the participating companies directly.
It has been 1 year since our participation in Target Gender Equality. The initiative has been helpful to us. We have understood the importance of not just setting overall targets, but interim targets as well. We have seen the number of female employees in management level has increased. We are already working on how to improve facilities for ensuring better, comfortable and safe work environment. We are even conducting monthly meetings discussing the progress of target gender equality. We would highly recommend other companies to join the Target Gender Equality program.
As a UN Global Compact participant, this program allows us to accelerate our practices of the United Nations Women's Empowerment Principles. We benefit from the action planning guides, workshops, and real-world examples provided by the program, which helped us creating a dedicated roadmap for our contribution to 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
One thing we have learned is that regardless of how big or small your company is, or how many
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned into a Sustainability Summit 2022. Please don't forget to hashtag SUSWeek 2022. And also, we are now about to engage on the panel discussion around infrastructure for smart cities. What do we really mean about infrastructure? And even when we talk about smart cities, it's a term that we are throwing around, but we're about to add some meat to the bones here. So please do add your comments. Add your questions. We'll be more than happy to assist in answering. When we look at sustainable socio-economic growth, we know that that could be achieved through infrastructure investment. And joining me this morning to have this discussion, we have Mr. Chris Campbell, who's the CEO for Consulting Engineers South Africa. We have Mr. Charles Nduku, who will be joining us shortly, who is the president of the South African Council for Architectural Profession. We also have Mr. Frans Dekker, who is the Managing Director for the South African Institute of Architectural Technologies, NPC. We also do have Mr. Bongani Dladla, who is the CEO of Construction Industrial Development Board. And we also have, last but not least, Dr. Patrick Nzime, who is acting head at Bankable Cities, Metros and Water Boards under DBSA. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Tabang, and good morning to everyone. Allow me to introduce myself, as Tabang rightfully pointed out. My name is Chris Campbell. I'm the CEO of Consulting Engineers South Africa. And certainly, being an organization with a member base of over 600 consulting engineering companies across the country, and having exposure to member associations across the continent and globally, because we are affiliated to both a regional body as well as the global body for consulting engineers. We are no strangers to what smart cities should be, what they can be, and of course, back home, being able to then take stock of where we are in the scheme of things. When we compare ourselves, for example, to our neighboring countries, Kenya, maybe significantly, and likely places like Nigeria, Lagos, and then even as far afield as, for example, let's just take Geneva, because that's where our international organization is headquartered. But of course, we've got to be real to where each of us are in the scheme of things in terms of development of our economies and some of the legacy setbacks and catch-ups and all of the unfortunate experiences that we might have had that have indeed set us back in terms of our aspirations. So, I certainly can go into a lot of the technical aspects, but I think that would be preempting the conversations. Thank you, Tabang, for that.
Thank you very much for the support. We definitely need the technical aspects, Mr. Campbell. So please do keep that in mind in terms of engagement. Can we have Mr. Frans Dekker?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm being the managing director at the moment of the South African Institute for Architectural Technologists. And if you look at most of the type of buildings that are actually constructed in cities and towns will be in the residential sector. And I believe that you have to look at your residential sector first, because that will pave the way forward for smart cities to actually to do what they are supposed to do without the buy-in from the residential sector, and therefore as the grassroots level, basically that of the building owner, the homeowner. That is where I think the whole thing needs to start. It is good that big companies, etc., comply and make sure that they, when it comes to sustainability, do everything in their power to do so. But as I've said, the majority of buildings are in the residential sector, and that is where we also need to focus. And that is why we as an institute are also involved with the SABS technical committees. I am currently, or was the convener of the 2021 edition of SANSTING 400 Part XA, energy using buildings. I'm also the current chairperson of technical committee. That's a subcommittee under a technical committee dealing with energy efficiency in South Africa. And I was just re-elected again for assessing, not assessing, but helping the legislation, which is basically minimum requirements to actually to achieve what we need to achieve. Thanks.
Thank you very much there, Mr. Decker. A critical point that's worthy of engagement is the legislation around creating sustainable infrastructure. So we're looking forward to talking to you about that more. Can we please have Dr. Patrick Nsime?
Yes, thank you very much, Thabang, and greetings to all fellow panelists. So I'm from the Development Bank, the DBSA. And for us, social and economic infrastructure is quite critical. In our case, our key focus areas, as you might know, are water and sanitation, roads and transport, energy, ICT and health, and education. So the notion of smart city and smart infrastructure appeals to us mainly because if we get it right, then we will be in a position to assist our cities to deliver better and faster services. So the word smart, as you said, we need to be very blunt because it means many things to many people. And for us, we are starting to learn, and that's why 2 years ago, we contracted the World Bank as a leading technical advisor to execute a smart city pilot program on our behalf. They are looking at 4 cities or metros, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, eThekwini, and Johannesburg. And the whole idea is to, as Franz was saying, to look at smart city approaches and practices which can be utilized by these cities in the rollout of the CAPEX program. And hopefully at the end of the day, and at the end of the program, we will get a pipeline of projects or smart projects where we can get colleagues on the panel, obviously with their technical expertise to assist us. But you said we need to look at the current reality, and the question I'm asking myself is, can we really be talking about they're experiencing MNDKs? Some of them are on the brink of collapse. They are technically dysfunctional and financially insolvent. So that's a paradigm that we need to address, or maybe a balancing act. And I don't know how we're going to approach that because the stakes are quite high. At the moment, we're experiencing load shedding like never before. And the question is, are we ready? And at the end of the day, the people who are affected the most is not the smart city, it's not the infrastructure, because those are external factors. I believe we need to worry more about a customer. Smart city is about people and by people. And if we don't shift, for instance, we keep calling the members of the public ratepayers and taxpayers, we don't regard them as customers because customers deserve the best service. If you give the customer the best service, customers always reciprocate. And when customers reciprocate, they'll be willing to pay for the services. And if they are willing to pay for services, we should be able to improve the revenues of most of our cities. At the moment, that is not entirely the situation, and that is why if you were to do a dipstick in all our cities today and find out the happiness levels of our customers, you'll be shocked. So COVID has given us almost a new mandate to revisit the way we deal with customers. Their needs, we need to understand what they like. We need to understand what their preferences are in terms of how we need to serve them. Because customers don't care how much we know. All they want to know is how much do we care. And I think the smart city concept and smart infrastructure gives us the opportunity for us to look at smart processes, smart partnerships, smart leaderships, smart everything. But otherwise, I don't think we are ready yet. So that's my contribution for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much there, Dr. Nzime. We truly appreciate the context that you've given to what are we talking about in terms of smart. And I think it's such a simple word, but you've added a bit of flesh there, which we look forward to engaging further around that. Mr. Dladla, welcome, and over to you. Please unmute yourself. There we go.
I knew I was going to be the first one to be reminded of virtual meeting etiquettes. Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues. And yes, we look forward to contributing to this. My name is, as indicated, Bongani Dladla, both a sustainability and a water engineer, currently leading the Construction Industry Development Board, which is a regulator and a developmental agent in the construction industry. So what our contribution towards building towards smarter cities is ensuring that there is the legislative and the regulatory framework to create the building blocks for smart cities. Smart cities do not start at using sensors. It starts off when you design your infrastructure. Is my network poor?
A little bit, but we've got you now. It just goes on and off, but you can continue.
Yes, thank you very much. As I was indicating, smart cities do not start at the perspective of using the data and actually using the sensors and all the technologies that comes with it. It starts at the inception of at design stage, at planning stage. Are we planning using the systems that will enable us to turn the data that will be collected at a later date to useful information? So it starts with also creating the frameworks, like you're building information systems at the beginning of your planning of infrastructure projects, so that we don't go later on in trying to figure out what to do with the infrastructure and try to convert it into smarter cities. So there is a lot of benefits to smart cities, but it actually requires thinking far earlier on, not at the point of construction, but at the point of planning. And that's the contribution that our entity also can contribute towards that.
We're looking forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Dladla. We're looking forward to you answering the very question that you posed. Let's go back to Mr. Campbell just to kickstart the discussions. I think, you spoke about the relevance of our legacy setbacks. Yes. What are the legacy setbacks that you believe have affected our perspective of infrastructure development currently, and also what entails developing a smart city? I mean, you've used quite a number of case in points there in other countries. So maybe you can bring in the legacy aspect and the technical expertise or capacity that we need to actually move forward.
Okay, thank you. So I guess I have like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, because this can take me an hour. So I don't.
No, 3 minutes, Mr. Campbell, please.
3 minutes.
Please, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Because it's a huge topic, and so I'll certainly try to respond in that space of time. So firstly, I think the realities that we face as a country, and over the past years post 94, we've done quite a bit in respect of trying to get water, sanitation to many more households, which should have been there in the first place. Surfaced many roads, etc., in many of what were our traditional townships in urban areas. You know, as far back, I guess, is 94. Was it 90? Yes, as far back as 1993, I recall being involved in a project where we had already then, with the then Soweto Town Council, been looking at and working on surfacing what were all gravel roads. And today, I guess we're a long way down that road in terms of the road surfacing. Unfortunately, with time and I guess maybe an overzealous approach to the capability and the capacity that would be needed to ensure that the correct people are in place with the appropriate skills and duty of care, would make sure that this infrastructure remained functional so that you could build on to that into the future. Where we are at this point in time, and I think one of our colleagues alluded to it, I think it was Patrick, that a lot of that has regressed. So whereas we should have been able to use that as a springboard, water and sanitation systems in many areas where they were functional are not functional. And these unfortunately are a lack of maintenance over time, not having the requisite and appropriate people deployed into the municipalities to make sure that service delivery remains at the level that we could convert more of our towns into these smart cities. Right now, Johannesburg, for example, would be nowhere near being able to be categorized, and the work that it would take to undo a lot of the deterioration. I am aware that the city of Joburg is likely looking at a project on the renewal and in its entirety of the city of Joburg. It's going to be quite a task. And why am I saying that is that if we just take transport as one aspect of it, a smart city should have been able to provide people, communities that commute in and out of and around Johannesburg with various options around public transport, where the public transport should be affordable, reliable, safe, functional, and integrated, and formal as well. And I think the elephant in the room there is the continued prevalence of an informal taxi system, not being integrated into a system where you could have buses, taxis, let's not even lament what has happened to Metro Rail and their system, which I think was completely allowed to be cannibalized by thieves and scoundrels through the scrap metal industry. So that rail system is just not serving the communities, and everybody is now reliant from an affordability and availability perspective on the taxi industry alone. So, we would never be able to then try and de-link ourselves from a minibus taxi system. And so there's an absolute dependence because everything else is not working all that well. A smart city, and I'm not going to drop names or anything, but a smart city can easily have pedestrians, cyclists, obviously safely allocated in the space, buses, trams, taxis, all on the same surface, not underground. And then your rail systems generally are underground, and they work so well that at the end of the day, people don't need to use vehicles. But the unfortunate converse has become the case. And so in our pursuit towards a smart city, our freeway improvement program, for example, GFIP, will never be able to cope with the traffic volumes because we've never been able to provide an integrated, reliable transport system that would allow people not to have to use their vehicles, on a daily basis, so that they could commute reliably and safely between work and home. And that's just one aspect. Another area which I, in just as a closing shot on this one is, in dealing with, it doesn't help for us to aspire from one base to something that's completely unrealistic. And if we deal with the realities, we may have a better chance going forward of fixing it. What am I talking about? I'm talking about human settlements. And if informal settlements are going to be an ongoing reality because of the shortage of housing and people, being encouraged to invade land, then maybe we should be more proactive in going ahead and informing those communities and community leaders around spacing your informal settlements so that you can retrofit services once, the dust is settled and so on. Because, unfortunately, it's going to be an ongoing hazard and an inability to be able to improve the lives and the conditions of people who settle there simply because you can't get an emergency vehicle in and out. One fire burns 100 of those houses. And, there's just no space to fit sewers and water supply. Yep. So we got to think differently on how we approach it with our own reality and not of necessity with these rose-colored glasses around, absolutely developed countries and economies. Thank you.
100%. Thank you very much there, Mr. Campbell. Perhaps, Mr. Decker, you can come in there. You spoke about the importance of, the residential sector having agency regarding, infrastructure development and so forth. Please unpack that, especially the word buy-in. That's what you use, that we need the buy-in from the residential sector. And I mean, that's a very critical thing there, Mr. Decker, because we're seeing also there's a lot of property hijackings that are happening as well. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm going to talk out of my experience as an architectural professional and being involved with CPD, with architectural professionals, etc. And I think let's go back to the word smart city, smart town, etc. I believe that you cannot have a smart city with a top-down approach where you've got requirements and legislation and you just tell the people, the homeowner, etc., this is what you have to do without educating them first, why it is needed, etc. I believe that if the homeowner and the building owner buy into this whole concept of energy efficiency, of water efficiency, of alternatives, instead of going on like we've done in the past 300 years with systems, etc., to see the benefit that they will have out of that and not just the cost factor. Because unfortunately, some of these things, I've just looked last night at a hybrid electrical system to a new development that I'm busy with at an old age institution, and the costs just to have a small inverter is astronomical, and I always wonder, why is it so astronomical? And people are just accepting certain things without actually investigating alternatives, etc., due to the fact that there's this attitude in this country: you will have to do what we tell you to do, and unfortunately that comes from the city down to the people. When you get building plans approved, etc., there's very little encouragement for alternatives to be investigated by the homeowner, because then our legislation at the moment is so that you have to get in professionals and they have to do rational designs before it can get approved, etc. So we've got all the standards and stuff already in place. We've got energy efficiency, we've got water efficiency, although voluntary, rainwater harvesting. The eastern part of our country where I live has got an abundance of rain. Why don't we start telling people why it is important to have rainwater collection systems, and why it's important, for instance, not to start using the expensive potable water for flushing toilets, etc. Why don't we start putting in alternatives there? Yes, I know it's going to cost a few bucks extra at the beginning, but that is where, for me, the whole concept of smart cities and smart development and all this kind of things starts. And that is by getting the people, the person with his home, etc., that connects to the infrastructure of local authorities, etc., to start taking that into account and to start implementing that. And as soon as everybody starts implementing it, I've read an article the other day on water efficiency. You know, if one person has got a rainwater, a tank, and collect rainwater in a city, it's not much. But if 5,000 people start doing it, you can actually see the cumulative effect that it will have on the availability or on the pressure that local authorities have to provide clean water, and we use about 15% of that clean water for actually purposes where we need clean water. Why do we use that? I'm also looking at our sewage systems. We know all our cities, for instance, at the moment, rely on gravity feed systems to sewer plants, etc. Most of these are due to the need for housing and the continuous development of areas, and these plants do not get upgraded. But why don't we go back and be smart and start looking at what we do at our houses at the moment? Why don't we start implementing a semi-treatment of our raw sewer, that we deliver it to the local authority already in a certain stage of treatment, so that it can take a lot of the pressure off the municipal systems? Then we might not have to spend millions and billions of rands in upgrading those infrastructure, and in the meantime allow pollution, etc., to our rivers and stuff. So there's much more to this word smart city, etc. So I believe that the perception at the moment, under professionals and under the public out there, when we talk about smart cities, oh, that is just another bunch of regulations that we have to comply with to make everything fit the local authorities because they don't do their work proper. But the main reason behind the smart is not being communicated downward to the people who can actually start doing it. You can only start it at grassroots level and then work up. You can't have a top-down approach and then try to fix something that's already wrong here at the bottom, because that is not going to work. Thanks.
100%. Thank you very much, Mr. Decker, because based on my, I don't want to be pompous and say educated opinion. It's just an opinion. It has been that top tier, from top down approach. There has not been any active participants from residential areas. I mean, smart is critical, but there are cons to smart as well, pros and cons. And we haven't had active self-determination from these residents who are paying rates and taxes. You know, we don't know, where their money is going, and have they been asked that, do they want some of these connectivities that the term smart brings? So I think you highlighting a very important point to say, let's have agency. How can we be more enabling to ensure that people actually participate and they know what they want? Maybe you can come in there, Dr. Ntsime, because you've given quite a broad analysis around the social and economic impact of developing smart cities. We know that with smart cities, it's a huge contributor to urbanization. And we know that with smart cities, it comes with a lot of traffic, it comes with a lot of pollution, crime levels are going up, high energy consumption, difficulty with overstretched social services. How do you think we can address some of these challenges? And I'm bearing in mind that why is this concept also leaving out rural areas who do need some of the advantages that smart cities can bring. But perhaps let's speak about the challenges first.
Yes, no, thank you so much. The good thing, or even the greatest thing that we have in this country is that we don't have shortage of skill, especially technical skills. We don't have shortage of funding. There's plenty of funding. Institutional investors and asset managers and commercial banks, you know it, even development finance institutions are sitting with a lot of cash. They're looking for the right projects to invest in. So as my colleagues have already indicated, we've got the right ingredients already. All we need to do is to do the right thing. Firstly, Chris indicated this notion of getting the right people into the right jobs. And there's an author by the name of Jim Collins. His book is entitled Good to Great, meaning that companies, for example, then this is based on the companies investigated in the US, where top 500 top listed companies, high performing companies, high market share, some of them, 11 of them, migrated from being good to great. And he found two key variables which added to his theory and his book as well. One, to say that those companies that transitioned from being good to great, they had the right people. And he uses the analogy of a bus, where he says there were the right people in the right bus. And in those buses, the right seats were occupied by the right people. Another one, he says it was because of leadership, and it's not ordinary leadership. He talks about servant leadership, where the leaders who drove those companies were driven by a lot of passion. They were selfless, they were humble, and they had a vision. So they didn't have to motivate their workers to become good or great. Already they had the right ingredients. So those leaders were able to steer those companies towards the right direction. And I want to use the same analogy into a municipal space. Our municipal space or local government, we've got buses which are full of wrong people. In other instances, we've got the right people in the bus, but they're sitting in the wrong seats. So we know what the problem is. The other day, I was talking to, in a workshop, I asked the delegates to talk about or to list what as a P word in local government, a problematic word in local government. And a lot of them are talking about processes or procedures or policies, but majority of them are talking about procurement. But none of them mention the word people, because that's where we need to start. As I said, the technology is there, the infrastructure is there, the investments are there, but we don't have the right people to drive us from where we are to this ideal of being smart. The former president the other day was talking about, this is our former president Mbeki, and I'll quote, he said, something is wrong with us and not the ANC, meaning that our problems are not external. We've got everything in place. The problems are within, they are with us. The way we behave as leaders, the way we behave as managers, we're not doing the right things. We're doing wrong things, unfortunately, which are costing us, which are costing the country, which are costing even the very same people you're supposed to serve. You're talking about the rural poor. Most of them are migrating, by the way, from the rural areas to small towns, to big cities in search of opportunities. Herein lies the problem. The current infrastructure is unable. Cities of Tshwane, the cities of Joburg are experiencing capacity constraints, and they are not able to operate and maintain fully because of the constrained capacity of infrastructure. So we are in a dilemma. Do we fix what is not working now, or do we jump into smart? All I'm saying is, if Jim Collins is correct, if those that are good want to go to great, let those who are poor then migrate to good, so that we
Yeah.
can then have a clear transition of moving from bad to good, from good to exceptional. So we cannot throw in smart whilst we know that we are dealing with dumb issues. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Ntseme. I really concur with the statement you made that perhaps we do have the right people in the wrong seats, and it's got to change. Perhaps, Mr. Dladla, you can come in there just as alluding and extending from what Dr. Ntseme has said around how do we move from good to great, from great to exceptional, and what does it take in terms of intelligent planning? You guys, you did say it starts with planning before we can build. What does intelligent planning entail?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And the contributions by my colleagues has been great, but I have to slightly differ with some of the aspects.
Please do.
I find that sometimes smart cities and sustainable development gets confused and used interchangeably sometimes. You know, the concepts of a smart city is about having the cities that are enabled by technology to be able to manage your assets, to be able to manage your resources and ensure service efficiencies. So that aspect I find is that we sometimes abscond as professionals of our responsibility, because you'll find a lot of the planning that happens, even in developing our cities, is done by professionals. We sometimes want to abscond the responsibility to other layers. Doc is correct to saying, you know, there are plenty of ideas, and money, as much as we think is not there, but money is mostly there. It's about the leadership that will move us forward in ensuring that there is a commitment to doing the things that we have promised. And also when it comes to issues around legislations and policies, you know, you have to understand the 12 intervention points that you will find in a system. And Meadow did good work in that, and it's actually quite practical. So saying also information availability is very helpful in changing the system. You know, if our cell phones didn't tell us how much battery was there in terms of percentage, and it just said charge it and you'll have battery for 12 hours, many of us will find ourselves with cell phones that are off most of the time, but the information being directly there. So even with your electricity, being able to see that it's reducing or how fast is it reducing. So the information itself is quite important. When we talk about the enabling legislations to ensure that we can develop smart cities, you look at something like building information system, you will never get to a point of building a digital twin, which is a responsive digital model of physical infrastructure that can do predictive maintenance, so that you can have, well, that can predict regular maintenance and tell you which parts are likely to break. You will never achieve that if you've designed your system using a traditional approach. So as we design our cities, even as consultants, and we need to look at not the turning a whole city, but turning a development first into a smart development where there's a information flow, there's data flow that enables people to make better decisions out of the information that comes out of that. So when you look at something like another problem that I think my learned colleague Chris has also alluded to in terms of water, you look at something like a pressurized pumping system of water. If you know the pressure in that and you're able to record that, you know when to expect demand out of that particular pipe network. You can do simple data analytics to be able to predict when to pump water, and you can save energy. You can save a lot of water from leaking in your system. So that's what we need to also be looking at, as to saying, as we design these systems, as engineers, as architects, as planners, are we putting in the building blocks
Mr. Dladla?
For later generations to be able to apply data analysis there to improve on it? Yes, sir. Is my network cutting?
Oh, it did a little bit, but you're back on. It's fine.
Yeah. No, I'm saying as engineers, as planners, as architects, we need to be designing what we have in our responsibility. We need to have the leadership and design systems that will enable future generations to be able to collect the information that is generated by these physical assets to be able to improve on that. So we must also take the responsibility back to us who are responsible as infrastructure practitioners for most of the infrastructure that we see around us. But again, Doc is correct that leadership is also quite important to ensure these things happen.
Absolutely, as they are the pioneers of creating these policies and legislation. But thank you very much for that. Perhaps, Mr. Campbell, you can come in here. I still feel and believe that we are excluding rural and township economies when it comes to this narrative around smart cities. How can we integrate them even more?
So I think, we need to be clear on, there's a certain definition of when an establishment or an environment then qualifies to be designated as a city.
Sure.
And we shouldn't confuse the two. And so if we start looking at rural versus urban, then, if your rural cities, if indeed those rural economies, locally driven, can grow to the extent that they're not perceived to be totally urban, but may have larger amounts of office buildings and all of the numbers of people as well, that then qualify them, then that's one aspect. I think we're a long way off that. Our country and our society, unfortunately, has a legacy of everything having been traditionally centered around the railroad network. And unfortunately, what you see is many of the rural settlements, which we may deem to be established towns, when the railways stopped, when the railways no longer stopped in those places, people were still living there. And so the economies there were then purely relegated to being driven by farming and tourism. There was no other forms of economic development that could assist in growing the economies in those areas. And in many instances, I can comfortably say this because at some point in my career, I did work for Transnet Freight Rail. I traveled on the rail network, being responsible for, as part of a team, for the maintenance of that infrastructure. And there are many, many ghost towns across the country that had to be abandoned because people then had to migrate to areas where they could secure employment, be able to feed their families and live, and survive. So if we look at our current rural settlement patterns, then a lot more needs to be done to ensure sustainability, because otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to get a mass urbanization, which has already happened in many instances, because people need to find ways of surviving and feeding their families. And the urban environment will never be able to keep up with the demands of that urbanization. And so it's important for us to look at both and the connectivity and not neglect the ability and the need to drive some broader sustainability aspects of economic livelihoods in those rural environments, so that people don't feel the need to migrate to the city, which will never be able to keep up. For example, right now, spectrum, the rollout of spectrum. I mean, the slow pace of that rollout is an absolute hamstringing the ability to have that connectivity available even in our rural communities, where they should be able to have that connectivity and not have an absolute dependency on mobile networks, which are very expensive.
Mm.
And I think therein lies an opportunity that, you know, with COVID-19, it has become possible for people to achieve business development and growth and connectivity, you know, from an agricultural environment, networks into supply chains through that connectivity. And if we could get that spectrum rolled out and you could get more connectivity at affordable levels to rural communities, there are business opportunities remotely that can be managed that way, that will enable, you know, entrepreneurs in those environments to grow and thrive, as opposed to finding themselves, you know, between a rock and a hard place and then have to leave to go to the towns like Johannesburg or Cape Town or Durban. You know, so therein there lies a challenge and an opportunity at the same time. And then I think what we also need to be mindful of is this is not only about the connectivity to what we may deem as rural. This connectivity should apply to the periphery of the city and the city. I mean, in many of your developed cities in the world, you don't need to have, I've seen it up in Fairview in Johannesburg at the fire station, because there's an open Wi-Fi at the fire station, you find hordes of people just hanging around the fire station because they can connect to Wi-Fi. Why don't we make that connectivity available as a net within the city? And you can limit downloads and those kind of things, but you know, there's ways of controlling it, but an absolute absence just limits even the people who live on the periphery of the city center to tap into that, where data is very expensive from mobile networks, and not everybody can necessarily afford a subscription to now a fiber network. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Decker, maybe you can come in there, just extending from some of the premises that Mr. Campbell shared. How can we guide government to make the right investments in terms of infrastructure?
Yeah, you know, I look at the word smart again, and I believe that we will be smart to start and where the problem is at the moment and where it starts at the moment, instead of having the problem to omit the problem. And that is my whole concept of smart city or smart development, etc. Now, if you go to your so-called rural areas, and I am at the moment in a small town, about 25,000 people in this town, so it is a small to medium town, and I know, and I as MD of the institute, our head offices are in Bedford View. I spend most of my time here in my own office, practice office here in the town, and I look at what's going on around us. Urbanization, I believe, is not just a problem for our bigger cities. If I just look, as I've said, if I just look at around, go out, go into Zululand, go into the other areas, look at your small towns, look at what's happening on the outskirts of those towns. In trust areas, etc. Buildings and especially dwellings are coming up left, right, and center without any formal infrastructure. And if we are smart, I think government should pay attention to this and assist the local authorities there, then to start looking at a smart way of actually providing the infrastructure. And there we have to go not to expensive alternatives, etc. There are cost-effective alternatives available than your normal sewer systems, your normal water supply systems, etc. I think in South Africa we spend billions and billions of rands every year on infrastructure development, which in the end is actually white elephants actually not being utilized as they should, because it was somebody there that, okay, this is what people need here, without getting communities involved and actually together with communities, especially where communities have started settling in areas, be it trust areas or whatever the kind of development it might be, formal or informal, but be involved right from the start there and then get some sort of formality in those type of developments, which can then assist in a smarter infrastructure and therefore a cost-effective management of those infrastructure. And I think that is where the other problem is. We put infrastructure out there, it might be smart, it might be conventional type of infrastructure, but very little attention at that stage, I believe, is being given to the maintenance and the upkeep of those systems over the next few decades, etc. And that's why we get systems that are not working after 10 years, or the so-called white elephants. So yes, smart cities, they can start there with the smart developments and stuff, but I don't think there is a difference between what happens at the outskirts of Johannesburg or Pretoria or Cape Town or wherever than what's happening in Zululand, what's happening in the Eastern Cape, what's happening in Mpumalanga, what's happening in Limpopo on the outskirts there. I think if you go and look at the population, the density of populations in certain areas there, the density of populations might quite exceed that of some of the formal settlements in our cities.
Sure. Thank you very much. Dr. Nzima, perhaps interchangeably with Mr. Dladla, we can answer this following question. We know that with smart cities, it brings a lot of opportunities. Like you both alluded to, your broadband communication systems, connectivity, etc., etc. But with the growing of smart cities, we are also noticing the huge or vast development of informal settlements. Can we perhaps, dissect that a little bit? Let's start with you, Dr. Nzima, and then we can go with Bongani as well.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a problem of planning, as Bongani alluded to. So integrating those informal settlements is becoming a grave concern, because they've grown to such a stage where to move them might probably become impossible. Because, for instance, I moved into Cape Town in the 80s, and if you drive along the N2, there were actually 1 or 2 shacks along the road. Nowadays, we've got over 500,000 to 1 million. So how do you integrate those? And I see what cities are doing. Instead of moving the people, what they do is they provide them with basic services. So the new trend globally is that because people want to be closer to their places of work, you then look at other alternative housing, for example, affordable and social housing within the proximity of the workplaces. In Cape Town, for instance, there was a project where municipal land was identified where social housing was going to be built, but unfortunately that project fell off. I'm involved currently with social housing in the city of Tshwane. The company is called East Social Housing or City Housing. So we provide people with opportunities for rental units to move away from informal settlements, to move away from areas which are not obviously favorable in terms of their living arrangements. So it is possible, but it's difficult. However, as my colleagues have already said, there are certain basic things that can be done. For example, there's no need to put new infrastructure in place. We need to look at existing infrastructure. It needs to be refurbished. We need to look at high water and electricity losses. We need to plug those, address those. There are smart ways of doing it. For instance, non-revenue water. Technology uses sensors when during the night the floor gets shut down, so that there are savings, and units can obviously improve their revenue. So also we need to incentivize private sector investments, because private sector is willing to come in to invest, but unfortunately due to regulatory and legislative constraints, that part of investment is being affected. For example, most of our munis are unable to go to the capital market to raise funding because of constraints in their balance sheets. As a result, we at the DBSA, for example, are investigating a number of options, which is not balance sheet funding, which is not project finance, which is not triple Ps, but basic things, for example, getting private sector on board, getting funding on board, and saying to a municipality, let's help you address your non-revenue or your electricity loss. We can make a deal where we ring fence future cash flows to be able to repay those debts or funding. If it's possible, then we can do it using our own funding and private sector funding without necessarily burdening the taxpayer with loans and stuff like that. So there are practical examples, there are innovations. However, the problem is traditionally government and local government is used to doing things the traditional or the old ways. If you bring innovation, if you bring in something new, definitely there's resistance and there's pushback, and that is where the problem is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dladla, can you just extend on what Dr. Nzime has said just before we each do our closing remarks?
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. No, thank you very much. Yes, really the issue of people moving from rural areas to urban areas, it's really premised on the challenges of where economic activities are happening. And Doc is correct, and it's something that we can possibly learn from. If you're looking at the rates at how our people are moving from rural areas closer to economic opportunities, and you think at the pace of which social housing can be provided, we really need to think innovatively around this. But it's not something new. For instance, if you look at how India have dealt with some of these challenges, it is to provide, as Chris has also indicated, the basic services like your water, your sanitation, all the open land parcels, which I think government is also starting now to releasing some of those land parcels, demarcate them, make them livable spaces. But you would have provided an opportunity for those that can afford to be able to build their own housing aspect. And it's been done in India, and I think there are some parts of Durban where it was piloted. That aspect would also assist us as we deal with the challenge of urbanization, people moving and not having sufficient housing in those areas. There's another aspect, and I think Mr. Tako was also alluding to, the issue around social facilitation as we undertake infrastructure projects. You know, that aspect, I think we've developed very good frameworks on how to do it. But in action, it sort of becomes a tick box exercise. I have seen that in Duna, I have seen that community, and then it becomes a tick box exercise, which is also another fundamental aspect of infrastructure development that could help to solve many problems, like projects where communities will not feel full ownership of, because those projects also, even during the construction stage, you find there's a lot of protection by the communities because they feel ownership of that piece of infrastructure to aid in service delivery. So there are a few things that we can do as professionals and professional bodies as we undertake our work to ensure that the infrastructure that we put in place, it does make sense in terms of sustainable development, but also put in the building blocks for us to be able to turn some of these projects into contributing meaningfully towards smart cities in future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dladla. Indeed, 100%. I think it is a cause for concern, but there is a solution to it where access can be provided. And it just also begs the question of how can, local opportunities be created? How can rural opportunities be created? How can we convert them to being smart, not necessarily as smart cities, but just to ensure that there's just a circulation of regional economies that are being developed and there is no congestion, because urbanization is becoming toxic, especially when it comes to environmental health and environmental sustainability. And I think it's not thoroughly being addressed in that manner because we are a third world country after all, which we are trying to make our way past that stage and that narrative. It's now time for our closing remarks. So as you answer, there is one question that has been posed by Tabani. You can just integrate it with your closing remark. Tabani, on smart city development, I think one of the biggest problems we have in this country is maintaining infrastructure. How can we be sure that these smart cities will be well maintained? Will they be privatized to run them well? Does ESCOM challenges affect these smart cities? So with your closing remark, as well as answering this question, I will start with you, Mr. Campbell, then we'll have Mr. Decker, Mr. Dladla, and Dr. Petrin.
So
In the last
thank you. And
Sure.
you know, I think it's always great for us to dare to dream. Our reality is we've got to make what we have work first.
Yeah.
And that means fixing what we have. I think there are too many weak points. Power supply, water is going to be likely a new what should we call it?
Threat?
The kind of experiences we have with outages on electricity, unfortunately, are going to flow into water because there's a backlog in the distribution systems and so forth to cope with the needs of communities, etc., etc. So I would like for us to, I would almost say that we need to put our energy into fixing what we have so that it is at this point functional, and start looking and planning for a future smart city environment that we would like to have. But that means also looking after some of the smart buildings we have already. And unfortunately, in our pursuits of smart, we haven't necessarily thought them out entirely. For example, early on, we spoke about green buildings and sustainability and using lots of glass facades for natural light. But guess what? They become excessively hot. So you need to run air conditioning systems which rely on energy. So your carbon footprint goes up, not down. So, you know, and I think in the other elements, I think there's a lot of education we need of all of our people across the country around water use, water reuse, all of the above. So my parting shot would be, let's put all our energy into fixing what we have, and we can move from there, because, you know, to assume that we can now leapfrog what's broken into something that to an ideal that we aspire to, may be a bridge too far. So I think we've got to work with what we have, fix it, make it work, and then move forward from there. And addressing very critically the people issue. I almost, you know, I want to say that we must be careful of assuming that we've got the right people in the wrong seats. You've got a lot of passionate people deployed in government who have the ability. I think the hardest task is going to be, how do we in private sector and public sector make sure that you have the right people in the right places with the passion of the patriotism that we all need to fix and make it work for the future. Thank you.
Thank you there, Mr. Campbell. Much appreciated. It's truly important. Let's fix it. Let's fix what we have. Mr. Decker, your parting remarks?
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, if we look at smart, you know, we have to be smart to be smart. It doesn't help that you want to be smart and by having a budget for a Korean motor, try to have or to buy a German motor or something, or a motor car, etc. So the first thing is there, be smart, and smart cities, or cities, be smart in actually going for what is sustainable, what you can afford, and what can be done on the grassroots level. And when I talk to professionals, I always say to them, being a built environment professional in architecture, engineering, etc., the Constitution say that we all have got the right to a safe and a sustainable environment. And we as professionals are the designers of those environments. And I think local authorities are the curators of that environment in many cases. And therefore, as local authorities and as professionals in the built environment, I think we've got a huge task on us laid down by our constitution, by the people of this country, to make sure that whatever we do is not going to create unsafe, unsustainable environments, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To be smart, you've got to be smart. Definitely taking that away, Mr. Decker. Thank you. Can we have Dr. Patrick, and then we'll have it closing as well from Mr. Dladla.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So with all the challenges and problems we've highlighted today, definitely herein lies a lot of opportunities for job creation, for entrepreneurial development. But that can only happen if we change the current service delivery models.
Sure.
Models that says government can do it on its own. Government can deliver social and economic. It happen through partnerships. That is community, public, private partnerships. Therefore, we need to spend our energies into creating new ways of doing things, new smart ways of thinking. As Chris was saying, we need to inspire our employees. We need to change and create a new saving culture. We need to create servant leaders. When we started in 1994, we had plenty of servant leaders. I don't know what happened to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We also don't know what happened, but hopefully that can be restored, and the true gems that ever had for the people can come back. Thank you so much there, Dr. Nzimi. Mr. Dladla.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, colleagues. And it was quite an interesting discussion, and I do hope we can take it forward because, you know, sitting around the table are also people charged with the responsibility of ensuring that leadership is provided in the built environment, to ensure that also the practitioners take their role in providing this leadership. You know, servant leadership will not only come also from politicians, but also from us professionals, community leaders, civil society, to ensure that we don't abscond our responsibilities. Yes, the issue of maintenance, as the one of the participants has raised as a question, is really something we need to discuss seriously as a country as to actually putting action towards it. I know it's not as shiny as opening a new bridge or designing a new treatment plant, but it actually saves us a lot of money in the long run and provides better service delivery than only attempting to build new infrastructure. But it is an important discussion that a lot of stakeholders have a role to play, and I do hope we continue the conversation with the colleagues as we find practical solutions to some of our challenges that our people face.
100%. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Chris Campbell, CEO of Consulting Engineers South Africa, Mr. Frans Decker, Managing Director for the South African Institute of Architectural Technologies, and Mr. Bongan Dladla, CEO of Construction Industrial Development Board, and last but not least, Dr. Patrick Nzimi, Acting Head at DBSA. Thank you very much for your insights and all your contributions as well. And we do believe that they will definitely make a difference to all the viewers that are watching and the organizations and institutions involved. Take good care, and thank you very much.